All right, so I promised that we were going to go learn how to download some web content, but before we do that, there's a general principle in Java that I want to teach you about, and I think it's best to kind of do it here in just sort of a one-off situation. It's not worth creating a whole app over. So we're going to use this brow.xy just like we've done before, browxy.com, and what we're going to do is we're going to see how we can use try and catch to work with some exceptions. So I'm going to give you a really awesome example to see how that all works, and then you'll see how that applies to web content in our next lecture. So first, to get started here, just go ahead and hit the try button there. That's going to get you started with the little hello world example here. This gives us, most importantly, our starting menu, but let's go ahead and get rid of this print line for now. Now, a couple of challenges for you here. The first one that I want you to do is I want you to create an array that holds 3 integers. Now, don't create an array list. I want you to create an array that holds 3 integers. You don't have to say what those integers are going to be, but just create the array, all right? Go ahead and hit pause now. All right, so hopefully that went well for you. The answer to this is you just do int with the square brackets to specify that you're doing an array. Let's give this the very boring name of just array, and we'll go ahead and say that this is going to be an int array of 3 items, and then we'll set a semicolon, okay? So then once we have this, the next challenge that I have for you is I want you to be able, oh, and excuse me, I forgot. We need to have a new int. If you ever want to check your code to make sure it's okay, just go ahead and hit this start button here, and it'll tell you if you had any issues. Okay, so with that, the next challenge that I have for you is I want you to do a for loop where you then add 3 numbers to this array, and the number should be 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so very simple, straightforward. You can do this. Hit pause now. All right, so hopefully that went well. Again, we are creating a for loop, and inside of this for loop, and you gotta, I'm so used to Android Studio of it making my ending curly brackets for me, I gotta make sure that I add that there. We're gonna have an int called I, which is initially set equal to 0, and while I is less than 3, then we are going to say I plus plus, just like that, okay? Then as far as code inside of here, what we want to do is we're going to say, okay, array at index of I is going to be equal to whatever I is. So, you know, the 0 index, we want that to be equal to 0. And then the 1 index, we want that to be equal to 1, so on and so forth. So after this, to make sure that this array looks like and is what we were expecting, we're going to go ahead and print it out. So we're going to do our system.out.print line, and then inside of here we've got to turn our array into a string, so we're going to say capital array with an s dot to string, and then we're going to pass in our array. Okay, don't forget our semicolon there, and with that, let's go ahead and hit start, see what we get here. Oops, and we've got an error on line 11. Let's see, cannot find symbol variable arrays. That's because we have to import it. Okay, thank you for alerting me about that. Okay, so we've got import, and then we're going to say java.util. Hopefully this helps you realize how cool Android Studio is, right? Like if we had just done arrays with a capital S and hit enter, it would have automatically done this import for us. We would have all sorts of autocomplete stuff. It's kind of good sometimes to go through the painful stuff to know, okay, this is what the good life is all about. And it looks like I'm still I did until instead of util. Okay, one of these days, and I called it Java. Good gracious. I got to work on my spelling here. But eventually, we do get 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so that's excellent. Everything's working. But now I need to introduce you to the concept of the try catch. So the basic idea here is there are sometimes errors in your code, right? Something happens. For example, here, if I make this for loop go through for 4 items, even though our array is only 3 things long, if I go ahead and run this code, look what we get. We get this exception, and you know, right now it doesn't look that bad, but in an Android app, if you ever get an exception and it's not handled properly, your entire app crashes. The user has no idea what's happened. They would have to reopen the app if they want to. Like, that sort of worst case scenario for an app is just that everything crashes like this. So you don't want to have uncaught exceptions inside of your code. And the way that you can handle this is using something called a try catch. And basically, the try catch literally allows you to try out some code, and if there's a problem with it, you can catch that problem and then handle the response appropriately. So for example, with this for loop, we could say try with an opening curly bracket, and we'll put an ending one there, which then means all this code we need to tab forward. And then we're going to put a catch here, and with this catch, we're going to say capital exception, just like that. And then we're going to call it lowercase e. That's typically what people do. There's nothing special about e. Like you could, name that error if you wanted to, or lowercase exception, but people usually just do lowercase e. And just to see if this is working, we're going to go ahead and do a print line here, and we'll say something just very simple like there was a problem. And we've got our all caps so that it's very dramatic, okay? So we'll go ahead and run this, and you'll see what's happened here is it ran through the for loop, and when it found the exception, when it says, oh, there was too many things here, we were able to successfully print out, hey, there was a problem. We didn't crash the program or anything, and in fact, it was still able to move forward and say, hey, I'm going to print out whatever's inside of array, and it printed out 0, 1, 2. So it kind of kept moving forward, which is really awesome. And there's all sorts of great information here inside of E. So for example, if we didn't want to print out there was a problem, if we want to print out whatever's inside of E, we can actually do that. And you can see it says, oh, java.lang.array index out of bounds exception. So it's telling us, oh, okay, you're trying to access something in the array that doesn't exist, and that's where your problem is. And so we could run the appropriate code if we wanted to do that. And also with these exceptions, because there's lots of different types of exceptions, you can actually catch for a particular exception. So if we go ahead and just copy the name of this one, I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste there, we can for this one maybe say something just like out of bounds. And then if we want to, we could catch just a more general all other exceptions, just like this. So we'll say exception lowercase e, and maybe on this one we'll do our system.out.println, and we'll do that one for e. Okay, so let me go ahead and start this. So you'll see it went to out of bounds, and it didn't print out what the E was in this case. So when you have two catches for different exceptions, if whatever one matches the exception exactly, it's going to run the code in those curly brackets and it won't run the others. But sometimes, you run some code and you're not sure what the exception is going to be. That's why you can have this general exception here to say, hey, something happens, let's do this general thing. So the reason I taught this to you is when you're downloading web content, there can be all sorts of issues that happen. You don't get back the right information. Maybe the user's internet connection isn't there or whatever. There's all sorts of exceptions that can happen, and you need to be able to handle that so that the app just doesn't explode, right? Like if an app crashed every time the user's internet wasn't working, like how terrible would that be? Maybe the user forgot that they were in airplane mode, or their Wi-Fi went out for a second. You would want to give them something more helpful, like, oh, your internet's not working, check your connection, blah, 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 something like that. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed learning about that. With that, let's go ahead and move forward with learning how to download some web content.